What's up, world? I'm Cameron McKinney, and this is Pop Culture Spotlight, a podcast about the movie September 5. Here's a quick synopsis. The producers for ABC Sports attempt to cover a hostage situation during the 1972 Olympics in Munich. The film stars Peter Sarsgaard, John Magaro, Ben Chaplin, and Leonie Benish. Standout performances. Peter Sarsgaard is without a doubt one of the best supporting actors of his generation. He's what one would describe usually as a character actor. Before I get into his work on September 5, I want to go back and highlight 5 of my favorite of his performances, starting with 2003's Shattered Glass, where he played journalist Chuck Lane, who finds out his colleague Stephen Glass is making up stories. For that movie in particular, I would argue that Sarsgaard and his co-star Hayden Christensen should have been nominated for Oscars. I think it has become an overlooked film. It's a movie about how most modern journalists try to be bigger than the stories they are telling. Next is 2004's Garden State, where Sarsgaard plays Mark, the estranged best friend of Andrew, played by Zach Braff. My favorite scene is where he confronts his mother's boyfriend, played by Jim Parsons, long before The Big Bang Theory. I know Garden State has become this movie that was loved in its moment and now despised by a lot of people. I love the film Garden State. I think Natalie Portman is all-time brilliant in it, and so is Peter Sarsgaard, along with Zach Braff. I just think that is still a really good movie. In 2009's An Education, Sarsgaard plays David Goldman, a man having a relationship with a 16-year-old girl. It's one of the best films that shows you why the power dynamics are off in a relationship with a big age gap. 2013's Night Moves, Sarsgaard plays an extreme environmentalist. His character Harmon is the one who persuades Jesse Eisenberg's Josh to cross the line. And finally, you have 2016's Jackie, where Sarsgaard plays Bobby Kennedy, who is attempting to comfort Jackie after his brother's passing. I'm not sure I would call it a problem, but most of the examples I gave you were movies where the other performances are the ones getting the accolades, not the one given by Sarsgaard. I mean, in Jackie, it became all about Natalie Portman. In An Education, it became all about Carey Mulligan. For Garden State, all of the talk about that movie had been about Zach Braff. Even with Shattered Glass, most people think of that film as a Hayden Christensen film, and most of that has to do with the fact that Christensen was making Star Wars movies at the time. In recent years, Sarsgaard has gotten a lot of praise, and most of that has to do with the fact that he's been in 2 popular miniseries, Dope Sick and Presumed Innocence, and it's easy to explain. The more screen time he's given, the more obvious it is to see he's a great actor. There's been a lot of talk over the years about category fraud when it comes to the Oscars, and I think Peter Sarsgaard is a perfect example of someone who has suffered because of category fraud. Like, most of the supporting actor nominations are not going to people who are actually supporting roles in movies, and that's all that Sarsgaard does. And in my perfect world, he would already be a 2-time nominee for his work in Shattered Glass and Garden State. Let's get to his role in September 5. He plays Rune Arledge, the president of ABC Sports, and for me, the most interesting figure in the movie. He's unwilling to give over coverage when it goes from sports to serious news. He's also the hardest character to get a gauge on, and I didn't until the film's last moments. A lot of the acting in this movie is brilliantly subtle, and I think that's the key to Sarsgaard in this movie. I think a lot of actors would play this character in a way where you would immediately get what his deal is, but I think the mystery surrounding the character is there because Sarsgaard is not revealing who he truly is. Sarsgaard will next be in the star-studded The Bride with Christian Bale, Jessie Buckley, Penelope Cruz, and Jake Gyllenhaal. The movie is written and directed by Sarsgaard's wife, Maggie Gyllenhaal. He appeared in her directorial debut, The Lost Daughter. In September 5, they paired Peter Sarsgaard with another actor who's making a name for himself, being a scene stealer, John Magaro, who has been great in Todd Haynes' Carol, Adam McKay's The Big Short, Kelly Reichardt's First Cow and Showing Up, and Celine Song's Past Lives. In September 5, he plays an unproven producer, Jeffrey Mason, and one of the best things about this movie to me is seeing him make these quick decisions because he's trying to prove himself. Magaro's another actor who hasn't got a lot of accolades because he doesn't have a lot of screen time in a lot of movies, or the ones that he does are indie films that not a lot of people see. Like First Cow, I thought he was fantastic in. Magaro will next be in the aforementioned The Bride and Kelly Reichardt's The Mastermind with Josh O'Connor, Alana Haim, and Gabby Hoffman. And finally, Leonie Benish plays Marianne, a German who works as a translator for ABC, and I would describe her as the person in the movie who fully understands the magnitude of the situation and the impact it will have on her country. I really like the scenes between Benish and Magaro. What's worthwhile about September 5 is the fact that it explores the morality of the coverage ABC is providing and asking the important questions. Do the producers have good intentions, or are they just chasing ratings? And many of them in the movie talk about the idea of telling a story, and that feels like a ploy to make it feel more admirable than it really is. This is also a movie that gets straight to the point. The performances, like I said, are subtle, not over the top, and there is a version of this movie where it would feel more grand. Like, one could imagine what Aaron Sorkin's version of this movie would be. There would be great monologues. He's a screenwriter who would share his opinions on screen, and what I like about September 5 is it doesn't tell you how to feel about the characters or the coverage itself. It shows you. It doesn't tell you what happened, and that lets you form your own opinion on the matter. I do really want to get into this movie's endings without getting into many details. The producer, Mason, played by Magaro, thinks he did a bad job of providing accurate news and has one final meeting with Sarsgaard's Arledge, who tells him basically that he's getting a promotion due to the rating success of their broadcast. It's the perfect ending for this movie, and there's a couple of things you can take away from it. One is maybe these sports producers should not have been the one covering the story in the first place, or the more cynical thing to believe is no matter who covered the story also would have covered the tragedy looking through the lens of their own careers. One cannot help but watch a movie like this about a station breaking news that isn't always accurate and wonder, have we gotten better or worse when it comes to the accuracy of network news? And that's an impossible question to answer because we have a million more options when it comes to breaking news. Not only do we have network television, now we add the internet on top of that. Because of social media, networks are now trying to break news faster than ever. And that really does complicate things. I mean, we're talking about 1972 when networks were only competing with one another, and even back then, we couldn't fully get things right. Now in 2025, we've added a million new variables to the equation. But what this movie gets to is what I believe to be the heart of what's wrong with news coverage today and news in general, is that nowadays it tries to get you to believe in a narrative. It's no longer about the accuracy of a story. It's trying to make you feel both good and bad, and it's trying to get the most eyeballs on it as humanly possible. I will say though, watching a movie that took place over 50 years ago makes you wonder if news was ever a noble effort in the first place. Like, I think we all used to believe in this idea that it used to be a good service for people to keep up to date on real events. But the truth is, we never really know the intentions of the people behind it. Mainly when watching September 5, all I could really think about is how would we cover a story like this today? I mean, would we still have the same issues? Like, in particular, there's one scene where John Magaro's character is given a piece of information to run with, and his boss, Marvin, played by Ben Chaplin, tells him to hold on it because he wants to wait for another reliable outlet to verify the accuracy of it. And in 2025, one would hope that we have the journalistic integrity to hold off on a story like that until we know it's true. But with so many competitors trying to break a story, the race is to be first, not the most accurate. It's sad to think about, but I believe that is the reality of the situation we are living in now. The landscape has changed entirely and not necessarily for the better. Oscars. So the early buzz for September 5 had this being a surefire Best Picture nominee, and that it would also get nominated for its performances as well. And that was not the case. The only nomination this film got was for its screenplay. And I have to think that that had something to do with the fact that this movie did not get tons of eyeballs on it. September 5 only made $6.7 million at the box office. The other thing this movie is lacking is star power in it. I mean, a movie like Spotlight Spotlight had Rachel McAdams, it had Michael Keaton, it had stars in it. That's how a movie like that got recognized. Peter Sarsgaard is the most recognizable face in this film, and there are still so many people who do not know that man by name, and the same goes for John Magaro. They have seen him in a lot of things, but don't know who he is. I'm also of the belief that the Oscars are trying to be something different than they've been in the past. They are trying to nominate different kinds of movies. I mean, September 5 feels like a movie that they would have nominated between the years 2000 and 2008, but in the 2020s, they are nominating very different kinds of films. I wouldn't have been mad if they nominated this for Best Picture, but I'm okay that they didn't. In the case of Magaro and Sarsgaard, I just want them to be nominated for something at this point. I don't even care what it is. I just think that they've gone to a point where they have established themselves as great actors, and it's time for people to start taking notice of that. One of the things that I did take issue with in this movie is its use of Jim McKay. I mean, Jim McKay was a famous ABC sports broadcaster for the Olympics. Why not just hire an actor to play Jim McKay instead of using archive footage? That could have been your star power. I mean, hire a super well-known veteran actor to play Jim McKay. I hate it when movies do this. I didn't care for any of the archive footage. Hire a real guy to play the character. That's what actors do. Hire Michael Keaton to play Jim McKay. There, I easily solved the problem. That's what I want you to do. Hire Tom Hanks to be Jim McKay. Hire someone like that to be in your movie for 20 minutes or so and add another good performance to your movie. I just don't care for archive footage in these kinds of films. I mean, I get it. Do they think that Jim McKay was so iconic that you can't replace him with another actor? But that's what acting is. Hire somebody to play the role. You are making a movie. I think he was a big enough part of the movie to have an actual actor play the part. That's really my only gripe with the movie. I could also see people reviewing this movie and calling it maybe not the most entertaining film of all time. I think it is entertaining due to the strong performances, but it doesn't play up the arguments that the characters have throughout the movie. I mean, there's one conversation in a hallway where they decide what to do about how they're covering the story, but again, and I don't want to harp on this, in the Aaron Sorkin version of this movie, that would be a huge moment in the film. The characters would have amazing dialogue, and the screenplay would basically tell you how to feel about what is happening during the movie. It really does make all the sense in the world that this movie didn't get a ton of Oscar nominations, because it's not showy, it's not a look at me kind of movie. Peter Sarsgaard is really good in the movie, but he's not giving a give me all of the awards type of performance, and neither is John Magaro. It's a film grounded in reality. It's not trying to be overly theatrical. And the other thing this movie is doing is it's not making it all about one actor. I mean, John Magaro is not really the lead of this movie. Peter Sarsgaard is not really the lead of this movie. If they were, and if this entire movie was through their point of views, then I think one of them would get an Oscar nomination, but this really is an ensemble piece, and the movie is more about the events of the film than it is about the characters. It's just a solidly well-made film, which I really do think history will be kind towards. I think more and more people will watch this movie and respect it. And one of the reasons is this movie perfectly captures how new all of this was back in 1972. There's a moment where the ABC crew notices there's a television on, and they are wondering whether or not the criminals are watching what they are filming on live TV. There's a real sense of loss of innocence in this movie, especially when it comes to Magaro's Mason. I mean, he enters this movie as a bright-eyed producer trying to make a name for himself during the Olympics, no less, and leaves with this hollow feeling of failure, even though his boss is telling him he's done a great job. And that's the thing that doesn't get nearly talked about enough when it comes to news coverage, is that people's jobs are on the line, and how they cover these news impact their careers. It makes these people look at these things as individuals instead of a sympathetic human being. Mason was having a human moment where he felt like he let down the public and the people involved in a tragedy, whilst his boss was just thinking about how well they did in the ratings during their time slot. Mason really couldn't believe in that last moment that he was going to get more work from ABC after what he had just done running the coverage for this hostage situation. So yeah, I don't know if everyone agrees with me, but my final take on the movie is that Sarsgaard's Arledge was not a great guy, and that I felt way more sympathy towards the Mason character. I say all this admitting that all of the characters in this movie and the real life people were put in an impossible situation. One obvious thing to say out loud is that probably the people running ABC Sports should not have been the people running this story, and that it should never have been viewed as a launching pad for somebody to make a name for themselves as a producer. I did watch Steven Spielberg's Munich this week as well, and I do have to say I like September 5 more than I liked Munich. And it largely has to do with the film's ending. I mean, there's a real celebration between all of the characters when they think that the hostages have survived and they think that they have accurately reported the news, and they think this is a huge victory both on a moral level and on a career level. I mean, they are on cloud nine. They think they have done a tremendous job of covering this historic event, and they've done it without any prep time. And the genius of this movie is you really feel the sadness of all of the characters once that's all taken away from them. And then there's so many thoughts you can have after that final meeting between Arledge and Mason. I mean, my mind went in a million different kinds of directions. That's what a great movie is supposed to do. It is supposed to get you to think about everything you just saw on screen. It had me thinking about the past, the present, and the future of how we cover these stories in the news. And if network producers are really the people we should be relying on at all to get the best coverage of these stories. Clearly, I don't have all the answers, and I like the fact that the movie doesn't give you all of the answers. The film's not judging the characters, it's judging the situation they were put in. For this movie to be good, which it is, it had to be made precise and to the point, because there is so much going on in it. It could have gone in so many different directions, and ultimately I believe it chose the right one. There's an alternate version of this movie where Sarsgaard's character is revealed to be a villain from the get-go, that he's some network boss who only cares about ratings, and waiting to reveal that by the end of the film is the genius of September 5. And listen, that's only my viewpoint. I don't know how other people view the character Arledge or the real person. I don't know if he's viewed as a villain. I'm only sharing my opinion on the movie and what it's telling me. Closing thoughts, the biggest reasons to watch September 5 is Peter Sarsgaard and John Magaro. They have done stellar work throughout their career and give two of their best performances in September 5. And really, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to watch this movie was to see them share screen time together, because there are a lot of similarities. They both worked with Kelly Reichardt. They both worked with established directors and writers, and both are not household names, but they are two of the best actors working today. When I see the name Peter Sarsgaard casted in a movie, it makes me want to watch that movie, and the same goes for John Magaro. They are two actors who fit in any kind of movie. I'm just glad they came together for September 5. And my last thought is this. It's more of a question. Do networks ever learn lessons from these situations? Like, did ABC learn their lesson from what happened in 1972? Or is history just going to continue to repeat itself because all networks care about are getting ratings? I mean, will that ever change? Has it changed? I don't know the answer to that question, and I guess I'll never know. And I don't watch network news in part because of that. I question the reliability of it, the accuracy, and most importantly, the intention of it. Does it exist to keep me well informed, or does it exist to get me to watch it? I obviously think it's the latter. I think the people who made September 5 agree with me, but maybe other people think differently, and clearly they do, because people still watch the news. Whether you're a fan of network news or not, there's a lot to get out of watching September 5. Thanks for listening to this edition of Pop Culture Spotlight. I'm Cameron McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I highly highly recommend you check out the film, September 5. Next week on the podcast, I'm talking about Bong Joon-ho's Mickey 17, starring Robert Pattinson, Naomi Ackie, Mark Ruffalo, Toni Collette, and Steven Yeun. So tune into that and please rate, review, and subscribe.